The lawyer read the wet parcel last, the way you save the thing nobody wants for the end of a list, and around the dining table the Coley family did the arithmetic they'd been doing all their lives. The 40 acres of bottom along Miller's Slough, and the rock rise above it, to Nora a pause. That's the will. Somebody exhaled. Her brother Dale didn't quite laugh, but it moved in his shoulders. Her sister June looked at Nora with the soft, sorry look she'd worn since they were children. The look that said, poor thing, Daddy tried to be fair, but what can you do? The good ground, the 200 tillable acres and the home place, went to Dale and June and the married-in nephew Cole. Nora got the 40 that flooded every spring and grew nothing but cattails and the granite knob above it where you couldn't sink a plow. Nora Coley was 29 and had spent all 29 of those years being the one they felt sorry for. She said thank you to the lawyer. She folded her hands. She did not say what she was thinking, because what none of them at that table knew. Not Dale, not June, not the nephew already pricing the good acres in his head, was that Nora had spent the last 2 summers walking that worthless slough with her grandmother's old survey map, and she had found the thing her father, in the end, had trusted only her to see. She'd always been the quiet one, the youngest by 9 years, born after the family had stopped expecting more children and, it sometimes seemed, stopped expecting much of anything from her. Dale was the farmer. June married well. Nora was the girl who wandered, who came home with her pockets full of odd rocks and her boots soaked, who her mother said had her head in the clouds and her feet in the mud, which was true, only nobody asked what she was looking at down there. She'd learned to look from her grandmother, Pearl. Pearl Coley had come onto the place as a bride in 1951 and had known the land in a way the men who worked it never bothered to, not as acres to be counted but as a body with a history. Pearl kept a hand-drawn map, updated over 50 years in 3 colors of ink, of where the water went, where the springs seeped, where the old creek ran before somebody's grandfather straightened it, where the slough filled and why. She'd walked it with Nora when Nora was small and the others were busy, and she'd pressed the girl's hand flat to the cold ground down by the wet bottom one August and said the thing Nora carried the rest of her life. Asterisk, the good ground shows you everything. It's the land that hides that's keeping a secret worth knowing. Star. Pearl had died when Nora was 19 and left her 2 things the family thought were worthless: the map and a brass door key to nothing anyone could find. Nora kept them both in a cigar box. The map went where she went. Everyone knew the slough flooded. That was the whole reason the parcel was a joke. Every spring Miller's Slough backed up and drowned the bottom 40 and stayed wet into June, and you couldn't get a crop in before July, by which time it was too late, and the rock rise above it wouldn't take a plow at all. 3 generations of Coley men had cursed that water and tried to drain it and failed and finally just written the 40 acres off as the price of owning the rest. Nora had spent 2 summers asking the question none of them asked. Not how do I get rid of this water, but where is it coming from? Because the slough didn't fill from the river. She'd watched it. It filled from below, and it filled in dry years too. Years the river ran low and the neighbors' ponds shrank. The slough stayed wet, which made no sense at all if it were only rain and runoff. Pearl's map had a mark down there, in the oldest, faintest ink, a small blue star and 1 word in her grandmother's hand: rises. Nora went looking for what rose. She spent the wet months in Waders with a probe rod and a level she taught herself to read from a library book, and she found, under the cattails at the low corner where 3 generations had seen only a nuisance, a spring. A real one, artesian, water pushing up under its own pressure from deep down, cold and clean and constant, running whether it rained or not. The flooding wasn't the slough's failure. It was the spring's overflow, spreading across flat ground because nobody in 100 years had shaped a channel to carry it. Her father had known. That was the part that undid her later. Harlan Coley, in his last year, sick and quiet, had watched his youngest daughter come in muddy and glad 2 summers running, and he'd asked her once what she was finding down there, and she'd told him, the spring, the water, what it might mean, and the old man had said nothing and nodded slow. And then he'd left her the worthless 40. Not because he'd given up on her. Because he was the only other one who'd ever listened to Pearl, and he'd decided the water should go to the one child who could see it. The doubter had a name and a grievance. Cole Everett, the nephew married into June's side, ran the farm's numbers now and fancied himself the shrewd one, and Cole came to Nora within a month of the reading with an offer dressed as a kindness. He didn't get out of his truck all the way. He leaned on the door. Nora, I'll be honest with you because somebody ought to. That 40's a millstone. Taxes on it, and it earns nothing. I'll take it off your hands. Give you a fair number, more than it's worth, honestly, just to keep it in the family clean. He named a figure that would have insulted the cattails. You could use the money. Everybody knows that. I'm keeping it, Nora said. To do what?
Grow rates.
To see what it does, she said. And Cole shook his head at her the way the whole family always had, and drove off certain she'd lost the little sense they'd credited her with. Nora stood in the lane and said her grandmother's line to herself. It's the land that hides that's keeping a secret worth knowing. Then she got a shovel and started, alone, to do the thing 3 generations of Coley men had never thought to do, which was not fight the water but guide it. The setback came the second spring, and it came the way it always does, at the thing she loved. She'd spent a year and most of her small savings doing it right. A hydrologist she couldn't quite afford, a surveyor to fix the spring's location on the deed, and, crucially, to establish and file her water rights before anyone thought to question them. Because water in that valley was law, and undocumented water was water you could lose. She'd cut a shallow channel by hand and rented machine to carry the spring's overflow off the flat and into a shaped pond, so the bottom 40 could finally drain and dry and grow. She'd planted the first of it, and she'd let herself, for once in her life, be proud. Then a wet, violent April storm came through and blew out the young channel she'd cut, and the water, freed and unguided, tore back across the bottom and drowned everything she'd planted and cut a raw gully through the rock rise she'd never touched. She stood in the rain at the edge of it and watched 2 years and every dollar she had washed flat, and the old family verdict rose up in her louder than the water. Asterisk, poor thing. She never could do anything right. Should have sold it to Cole Star. That night she sat alone in the farmhouse with Pearl's map on the table, the ink running a little where her wet sleeve had touched it, and the brass key beside it that fit no lock, and she turned her grandmother's line over and it had gone bitter in her mouth. The land that hides. Maybe it was only hiding the plain fact that her family had been right about her since the day she was born. She didn't sleep. But in the morning she went back out to the gully the storm had torn through the rock rise, the one part of the land she'd never worked, because she was a person who, even flattened, went and looked. And in the raw, wet cut the flood had opened through the granite knob, exposed for the first time in 10,000 years, was a seam of something pale and layered that was not granite at all. She knelt in the mud, the way Pearl had put her hand to the ground, and she understood 2 things at once. The rock rise everyone called worthless because you couldn't plow it wasn't worthless. And the storm that had wrecked her hadn't only taken. It had shown her the rest of the secret. She'd been farming the water and missing the stone. She changed her whole method after that. She stopped trying to plant the wet 40 on the old family calendar and let the spring do what a spring does. She finished the channel properly this time, engineered, permitted, and she built the shaped pond into a reliable, permanent water source fed by pressure from below, the one thing in that valley you could not buy and could barely find, dependable water in dry years. She fenced the rock seam and had it looked at, and she kept the water rights papers, filed and sealed, in the cigar box with Pearl's map. The verdict came the way it comes in that country, in the form of a drought. The 3rd summer went dry and then bone dry, the worst the valley had seen since Pearl was a bride. The river dropped. The neighbors' ponds cracked and greened with scum and failed. Dale and June's good 200 acres, the coveted ground, the fair inheritance, stood stressed and pale, because good soil is only good with water, and the water wasn't coming. And down on the 40 everyone had pitted. The artesian spring pushed up cold and constant out of the deep, filling Nora's engineered pond while every other water source in the township went to dust. Water like that, in a drought, in a valley run by water law, is not a nuisance. It is the most valuable thing for miles. The verdict became a number when the appraiser came, first for the water, the documented, senior-filed rights to a spring that ran when nothing else did, worth more in that dry country than the whole home place, and then for the pale seam in the rock rise, which the geologist identified as high-grade agricultural limestone, the exact stone every acid-soured field in the county needed spread on it to grow, sitting in a ledge you could quarry small and clean. Not a fortune from the sky. An earned worth, appraised, filed, and real. The water leased under permit to the drought-stricken farms around her, including, when it came to it, her own family's dying 200 acres, and the AG lime sold by the ton to the same neighbors who'd pitted her. Between the two, the worthless 40 out-earned the good ground it had been the shameful afterthought of. Steady into the low six figures a year once the drought showed everyone what water was worth. Which brought Cole Everett back up the lane, and this time he got all the way out of his truck. He stood in front of the pond that was keeping the family's crops alive that August and could not find the shrewd thing to say. The family's own good acres were drinking Nora's water now, under a lease she'd priced fair, fairer than she had to. "I offered to buy this," Cole said, finally. "For nothing. I told you it was a millstone." "You did," Nora said. "I made you feel like a fool." "You made me an offer," she looked out at the water. "I'm making you one. The home place needs this water to get through the dry years, and it'll need it again. I'd rather the family have it at a fair rate than watch you all sell out because nobody would see what was under the reeds." She let it sit, no barb in it. "I'm not going to hold it over you, Cole. Grandma Pearl left the seeing to me. She didn't leave me the meanness." He didn't have an answer to that. He shook her hand instead, which from Cole was a kind of apology, and the water kept the family's fields alive through the worst summer any of them could remember, and nobody at any table ever again said poor Nora where she could hear it. The good came spread wide the way water spreads. Nora's spring, permitted and shared, carried a half-dozen neighboring farms through the drought that would have broken them, and the little lime quarry gave winter work to 2 men from a family down the road who'd had none. She put money back into the home place her brother and sister had inherited, no strings, because that was what Pearl would have done, and the Coley name stopped being one thing to the older siblings and another to the youngest. That was August. By the following spring the valley called it Nora's Water, and the girl they'd all felt sorry for had a standing at that dining table she'd never once had growing up. Earned, not given. She kept Pearl's map framed on the farmhouse wall where the light hit the faded blue star and the one word, "Rises," and one evening, sorting the cigar box, she finally understood the brass key that fit no lock. It was the key to the old spring house her great-grandfather had built over the water and let fall to ruin a lifetime ago, before the family forgot the spring was ever anything but a flood. Pearl had known. Pearl had kept the key for the one grandchild who'd go looking for the door. Nora found the spring house foundation under the cattails that summer, and rebuilt it, small and square over the cold rising water, and hung her grandmother's key back on its own lock at last. Some evenings she'd stand in the doorway in the last light with her hand flat against the cool stone and say the line the way Pearl had said it to a muddy, overlooked little girl who turned out to be the only one listening. Asterisk, the good ground shows you everything. It's the land that hides that's keeping a secret worth knowing star. The land had hidden its secret in plain sight for 100 years, under the one parcel nobody wanted, waiting for the one child nobody counted. And in the end her father hadn't left Nora the worst land at all. He'd left her the only piece that was keeping a secret, because she was the only one he trusted to hear it. If you've ever been handed the thing nobody else wanted, and seen in it what they couldn't, tell us about it in the comments. We read them all. The moral is quiet as a spring. Worth isn't always where the family points, and the people we underestimate are often the only ones still looking closely enough to find what everyone else walked past. What hides isn't broken. Sometimes it's just waiting for the one person patient enough to see it. Tell us where you're listening from tonight, and about the person who taught you to look closer than everyone else bothered to. If the story found you, share it with someone who was handed the rocky parcel and told to be grateful. And whatever overlooked ground is yours to walk right now, may you have your grandmother's eyes, may the secret keep until you're ready to hear it, and may you live to see the water rise clean where they only ever saw a flood.